arrived for the session, or ASME MEGAbite session on digital technology, AI and learning, a dangerous triumvirate. Let's check whether I can spell that word, say that word properly. A few housekeeping notes. So obviously we've got the chat box, the meeting chat. So please do post questions in there as we go along. We'll be keeping an eye on that. There may be some questions that we can sort of bring to Jared's attention as we're coming through and talking through the sort of main bulk of the evening. But there may be some questions that we keep and hold for the Q&A bit that we have in the last sort of 20 minutes or so. As I said, there will be time at the end for some Q&As. Those of you that are just arriving, the session is being recorded, so a recording will be available for those that are ASME members to go back and listen to. And any of you that would prefer or need closed captions, there's an option at the bottom of your Zoom panel to add closed captions. If you click on that, then it will bring those up. If there are any technical issues at all during the course of the evening, if you could email our events team who are live and keeping an eye on that inbox for any sort of tech problems, if you could email those rather than putting them into the chat, and then there'll be someone on hand to kind of help with any bits and pieces there. So that's kind of the housekeeping side of things. So if I could sort of move on to the sort of aims of the evening. So obviously, good evening, welcome. This is an ASME MEGAbite session. I'm Lisa. I'm an Associate Professor in Med-Ed at Leicester, member of the TEL-SIG group and committee, and it's my absolute pleasure to chair this evening's session. Obviously, we all recognise that there's a central role of digital tools already, or a central role, so the digital tools play in so many aspects of our educational practice, and it's continued and likely expanding integration as newer technologies become much more readily accessible. And the focus of this evening's topic will be to explore how the use of such technologies may affect the students' learning in perhaps less helpful ways, with particular attention being given to the impact on sort of cognitive steps that are necessary for learning and for expertise development. And so we're really excited to delve into tonight's topic and introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Jared Cooney-Horvath, who's joining us from across the pond. Jared's a neuroscientist, educator and author. He works in and has published extensively in the area of educational neuroscience and its applications to learning and education. So there's going to be lots of hopefully really useful insights and thoughts to take away from this evening's session. And as I said, following Jared's talk, we will have a sort of 20-minute window at the end for getting into some meaty Q&A. But if there are questions as you go along, do pop them in the chat and we'll manage them as and when they come in. So without further ado, I would love to hand over to you, Jared. And I'm going to mute and make myself disappear on camera.
Hooray! Thank you so much, and hello, everybody. It is lovely to meet you all, albeit digitally. One of these years, I'm going to move over to Europe, and I'm going to come up, and I'm going to see you all live, but for now, we'll do the Zoom thing. So before we kick off today, we're going to be taking a look at tech, AI, learning, the whole fun shebang. But I should give you a bit of fair warning. I am an absolute card-carrying Luddite. I hate digital technology. I think it is an absolute mess. And I think for all the good we've gotten, I think the bad way outweighs the good. And I would give it all back if I could. That means we wouldn't be able to do this, but if that means my daughter lives in a better world, I would give that up. So just know that whenever I talk about tech and learning, that is my the colored glasses I wear. So just as anything comes out of my mouth, just always kind of keep that in mind. And so that way you can kind of temper. I'm just one dude who shares data. That's how I interpret it. If you see it differently, cool. Just know, I want you to know, put that out front. That's where I'm coming from. So, all right, let's kick this sucker off. So we are talking tech, AI, learning. And you just heard this. Digital is the future. It's so much a part of everything we're doing. The question I would say is, why? Why? Ask anyone why it is such an integral part of what it is we're doing. And the only answer you'll conceivably get is because it exists. Well, great. Heroin exists. I don't see us putting that in the classroom, yet everyone thinks, no, because tech is here, that must be the future. And the joke is, it absolutely isn't. OECD recently said people who use computers very frequently to learn do a lot worse in most learning outcomes. JPEL, International Research Organization, computers do not improve grades and test scores. Online courses lower academic achievement compared to in-person courses. Now, I teach K through 12 primarily. I'm in university on occasion. But I want to just show you across the board. Here's a paper of the largest paper ever done looking at tech and learning in primary year students in the US. 150,000 kids. Their conclusion, even small amounts of digital device use in class, 30 minutes, are negatively related to scores on reading and comprehension tests. Let's go to the other side. Let's go to tertiary where I cut my teeth. Expanding the use of this paper, by the way, came out a couple years ago. They looked at 125 moderators of learning at the tertiary level, university sector. 125. Hands down the worst. You guessed it, digital tech. Expanding the use of digital technology at the expense of any other form of instruction is likely to have detrimental effects on achievement. Any other form of instruction? Here are two papers published last year. One that shows if you invest in air conditioning, you will see better learning from your students than if you invest in one-to-one computers per kid. Here is Larry Cuban, the EdTech guru at Stanford University. He is the father of EdTech. Computers were supposed to improve learning and alter teaching. Neither of these things has occurred. Now, here's the biggest joke with all of this. Larry Cuban, still pro-tech. He's arguing you're just using it wrong. You got to learn to use it better. JPEL, still pro-tech. You're just using it wrong. Use it better. OECD, still pro-tech. We need more tech. Just use it better. Man, if I had 4 decades of data showing that cigarette smoking harms your lungs, the proper response isn't gonna be, you're smoking wrong. I just need you to smoke better. The proper response is to stop and ask, wait a second, what's going on? Is this a solvable problem? And if the answer is no, then we gotta rethink what it is we are doing. So what is the problem? What's going on when it comes to digital tech and learning? The biggest problem, so far as we can see, is here. It's a problem called primary function. So every tool in the world has a primary function. This says when you pick up or access that tool, what's the first story that pops into your mind about how you need to be using that tool? So think about a hammer, right? There are a dozen things you can do with a hammer. Scratch your back, pop a bottle cap, screw something to the wall, throw it at a bird, paperweight, doorstop, whatever you want to do. Dozens of things you can do with a hammer, but 90% of the time, 90% of us use a hammer to hit things. So as soon as I give you a hammer, you're going to activate that story and say, cool, what do you want me to hit? So what is the primary function of a computer? When students sit down in front of a computer and we say time to learn, what's the first thing that pops into their mind about how they need to be using those tools? Well, let's see if we can't find out. Now, we're going to come back to that. Real quick, there's something I've got to teach you about cognition, and then we're going to come back to that primary function question. We're going to see how it fits together. So I want to teach you what's called a learning principle. So this is a principle of human learning. What I mean by saying it's a principle is I mean this will be true for anyone across the board. From age 5 to age 85, boy, girl, tall, short, doesn't matter. If you exist and you're a human being, this will hold true for you in your learning. So this is kind of a little nugget we can hang our hat on. So what is this principle of learning I want to show you? I'm going to start with a quick video. Now, if you've ever seen these types of videos before, you know how tricky they can be. So just try your best to follow along. But if you lose track, don't worry about it. It's tricky. Just do your best. Here we go.
How many passes does the team in white make?
Go!
The answer is 13. But did you see the moonwalking bear?
You knew that had nothing to do with it.
Go!
Okay, so how many of y'all missed that? Now here's the trick. I have a machine in my lab called an eye tracker, so I can see where people look when they watch this type of movie. Guess where 100% of people look as soon as that bear comes on? Boom. We all look right at it, but most of us never see it. Why? Our principle begins here. You remember only what you pay attention to. So attention is everything when it comes to learning and memory. So the best way to think about attention, think of it kind of like a filter, right? That determines what's relevant gets into your brain, what's irrelevant gets out of your brain. So in this case, we got all this stuff coming into our brain. We set our filter. Count the white ball being thrown around. That makes it into your brain, deemed relevant, gets in, you can build a memory. Moonwalking bear gets into your brain, it's being processed, but it hits your attention, it's deemed irrelevant, love it or hate it, you bounce it out, you will not make a memory for that thing. So attention is everything. But there's a second part to this principle, and it's here. Now I want to put up a picture here. Now you've never seen this image before, I'm guessing. So what I want you to do is I want you to set your filter. I'm going to change something about this picture. All you've got to do wherever you're at, point to whatever it is I've changed as soon as you recognize it. Here we go. All right. And okay. Was that hard? Of course not. What do we got? We just got these sun things coming and going. Sweet. All right, let's play the same game again. On the next slide, I'm going to put up another new image. You've never seen it before, so I want you to set your filter. I'm going to flip that image back and forth, just like this. Every time I do, something is going to change. Same exact game. Just point to what's changing in this picture here. Uh-oh. Now, I'll give you a hint. It's not a small change. In fact, you might say it is a fairly mountainous change. Yes, it is that giant mountain appearing and disappearing in front of this woman's face. So wait a second, why was that so difficult? Here we had no problem. It was fine. Why was this one harder? You probably got it. It's because this one has that little white flash. Every time I turn picture, it's a white flash. This one was just picture, 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 picture. This one, white flash. White flash. Now that white flash must be doing something to us. So what's happening is every time that flash comes on, your brain registers that as a threat or an uncertainty or an unknown. And anytime your brain registers a threat, the first thing it does is it dumps all incoming information. About the last half second of whatever you were doing gets tossed for good. You don't make a small memory, a baby memory, it's gone. Why? Why do we have a mechanism that says if something crazy is going to happen, we're going to dump your memory? It's there to save our life, right? If you're reading a book and a bear comes running at you, you don't want your brain saying, ooh, give me a second, bear. Let me just finish making this memory and over to you. No, whatever you're doing must be irrelevant. So we have a mechanism that says, cool, dump it. I need you 100% focused on what's about to happen. That's why it's so hard to see what's changing. Every time that flash comes on, your brain's just wiping your memory. You keep forgetting what it is you're trying to do, and you have to find a whole new way to kind of go through this process. So in this case, it is that giant engine appearing and disappearing under the wing. So we're back here. We remember only what we pay attention to. Cool. Oh, but it is wildly fragile. It is a completely dirty system. I mean, we are dumping information left and right. It is not a clean system. Now, who cares? Why does any of this matter? Like, I don't think any of us are going to teach our students with a giant strobe light behind us and wonder, hey, why aren't you guys learning? Like, who cares? Here's where this comes good. I want to play a quick game with you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my timer for 10 seconds. Now, when I say go, you're going to have two jobs for me. So the first thing I want you to do, and you can just use your finger and you can write on your palm or the tabletop or your knee, that's fine. We'll just go analog here. When I say go, the first thing I want you to do is write out the first 12 alphabet as quickly as you can. So A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, up to L. When you're done doing that, I then want you to write out the first 12 numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So I'm gonna give you 10 seconds to see, can you do all that? Can you give me 12 letters, then 12 numbers, or let's see how far along that process you can get. All right, and ready, set, go. Stop. All right, how'd you do? Now, if you're like most people, you did pretty good. Like a lot of you will have finished, and a lot of you more will have gotten pretty close. Like the 7, 8, 9, like you were almost there. Perfect. All right, let's play the same game again. I'm gonna give you 10 seconds. You're gonna give me 12 letters and 12 numbers. Oh, it says my internet is unstable, so hopefully we'll come back. But all right, so what I said is we're gonna play the same game again. I'm gonna give you 10 seconds. You're gonna give me 12 letters, 12 numbers. Same exact thing. Except this time, instead of writing the letters and then the numbers, I want you to jump between the two. So first I want you to write the letter A, then the number 1, B, number 2. Same thing, we're just doing 12 letters, 12 numbers. All we're doing is jumping between them. 10 seconds. Let's see what happens this time. All right, and ready, set, go. Stop. All right. And how'd you do that time? Now, if you're like most people, you didn't get anywhere near as far that second time. Like most people only get about 2/3 of the way through that time. But more importantly, how many of you started to get a bit confused? Like, look, it's just letters and numbers, but by the time you get up to E, all of a sudden you're going A, B, C, D, E, F, F, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, G. So wait a second, why was that so difficult? Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the wonderful world of multitasking. You can't do it. No human being in the world can do it. Multitasking is not a skill issue that says, so long as I just practice well enough, I'll get that skill. No, it's a hardware issue. It's a brain problem. Remember we said, think of attention kind of like a filter that determines what's in, what's irrelevant gets blocked out. Yeah, problem, you've only got one attention filter slot in your brain. It's a little nugget here behind your left eye. So this means anytime you want to do two things at once, you cannot do them at the same time. The best you can do is start one, take that filter out, put in the new one, jump to this one. Take that filter out, back to the old one, jump to this one. Now, swapping that filter takes time. It takes your brain about 0.1 to 0.2 seconds to swap out, during which time your brain goes black. You process absolutely nothing. That's why you were going slower. Every time you were jumping letters and numbers, you were losing about 0.2 seconds of your life. But more importantly, every time you swap out that attention filter, guess what else your brain is going to do? White flash. White flash. Every time you jump between tasks, swap your filter, your brain assumes whatever you were just doing must have, and it dumps about a half second of incoming information. This is why a lot of us got confused. Once you get up to about E and you're out of any simple pattern, you got to keep starting from scratch because your brain literally forgets what it is you're doing. I ain't even going to pull this punch. Multitasking, the single worst thing human beings can do for learning and memory. When you multitask, you will go slower, your memory will drop, your accuracy will tank, and your enjoyment will suffer significantly as well. Everything goes down when we multitask. Now, who cares? Why do we just talk about all this? What does this have to do? Go back to our computer. Remember, we're talking about primary function. When the person starts using a tool, what's the first thing that pops into the mind about how they need to use that tool? Now we can say, what is the primary function of a computer? So here is a breakdown per week of how teenagers were using computers in the US. Now, these values I went back to 2018 to get these values, with the idea being that these will now be your students. They will all be what, 24 to 26 in that range. So these are kind of our kids, how they were raised thinking about computers. So here we go, per week. How are kids using computers? Let's find out. 10 hours, 45 minutes playing video games, 10 hours watching TV, videos, YouTube, Netflix, all that fun stuff, 8 hours, 15 minutes scrolling social media, 7.5 listening to music, 3.5 doing homework, nice work kiddos, 2 doing schoolwork, 1:15 reading for pleasure, a whopping 1 hour creating actual content, 15 minutes writing for pleasure. When you extrapolate this, and remember that school is only in session about 180 days a year, this meant per year, your students were using a computer for learning purposes about 200 hours, which is really powerful until you realize your students will be using the exact same tool to passively consume rapidly switching media content for over 2,000 hours a year. How do 90% of people spend 90% of their time using a tool? I think we just found our primary function. And I'll bet I could sum that up. Passive consumption of rapidly switching media content. I'll bet I could sum that up in a single word. What is it? Multitasking. What is the one thing we just learned is horrible for learning? The worst you can do? Multitasking. What is the one thing the next generation has spent thousands of hours training themselves to do on a machine like this? Multitasking. Is it any wonder that when human beings now, well, younger than our generation, sit down to do studying on a computer, they will make it on average 6 minutes before they start multitasking. And at which point, man, the studying is basically done. When they sit down for live Zoom sessions like this, 15 minutes on average before they start multitasking, which means over half of you are probably doing something else right now. When people use tech during class, 38 minutes of every 60, they will be off task. 60 minutes of every, or excuse me, 60% of every hour, they will not be doing what you want them to do. Now we come back. I want you to recognize the reason why we have 4 decades of computers showing harmful learning isn't because they can't be used for learning. No one has ever argued that computers can't be used for learning. That is a horrible argument. Literally anything can be used for learning. My glasses case can be used for learning. My ferret can be used for learning. Anything can be used for learning. The argument is computers so often aren't used for learning that now when we try and shoehorn that function in, learners have this massive obstacle they've got to overcome, and the vast majority of our students simply cannot do it. So I always kind of say it like this. Give me a group of alcoholics, put them around a table, put a big jug of beer in the middle of that table and say, all right, everyone, I want you to use this beer to learn about buoyancy. Well, look, there's nothing about the beer that says you can't learn about buoyancy. It is perfectly suited to the task. But everyone around that table has a very different idea about what beer should be used for, and it ain't that. So even if they manage not to drink it, I promise you, they will not have learned anything about physical properties. They may have learned a little self-control, but that's as far as you can expect from them. That's the computer problem. We have lost this battle. The second computers entered the home, and more importantly, the pocket, they stopped being learning devices. And it doesn't matter how much we try and shove it in, it ain't gonna work. This is why Sweden recently banned all tech outside class from their schools. Not cell phones, all tech. Why? Because they're the only ones looking at the data saying, wait a second, there's a better way to do this. It's done. It's not a learning tool anymore. Finland is following suit. Give them about 3 more months. I think they're on board too. Scandinavian countries, who'd have guessed? They're always one step ahead of us when it comes to this, but there you go. So this is why computers, the more you use it, why does it say my internet connection's unstable? Everything should be good. Oh well. But this is why the more we use computers, it's ever going to be good. There is, like, people keep saying, just work harder, just try better, you're using it wrong. There is no right way to use it. Unless you can stop computers being in the home and in the pocket and only have them in classrooms, there will never be a right way to use it for learning, because that's not what this tool is used for. Now, I don't want you to think it's all doom and gloom. So when are computers useful? Your good motto becomes this: something will always be better than nothing. Right? You have someone with a specific learning disability, they cannot even engage without tech. Of course you bring in tech. Something is better than nothing. You're an F1 driver and you can't shut down Monaco to practice your laps. Of course you use tech. Something is better than nothing. I'm going to make something up. Imagine there's some pandemic. Like, this will never happen, but global pandemic and we got to shut down schools. Of course we use tech. Something is better than nothing. But if you have the choice between two somethings, you always pick the better something for your goal. And so far as your goal is learning, tech will never be that something. So this is why I say anytime you can, log off. If your students are reading hard copy versus digital, they will learn more. Now, the reason for it, someone asked me the other day, why is that? The biggest reason, there's a couple, but the biggest one is our memory is based on space. All right, so I don't know if you all have ever played. When I was growing up, there was a game called Grand Theft Auto. And so the way it worked is, as a video game, but in the corner was like a little map. So you always knew where you were in that world. You never got lost. Your brain has that map. And anytime you make a memory, it becomes stamped with a 3-dimensional location. Where in space did this thing occur? Hard copy books, by their very definition, have a 3-dimensional location. Till this thing burns into dust, the word "the" will be 10 pages in, left page, top left-hand side, it ain't going nowhere. You read that same thing on a screen, the word "the" starts in the bottom, goes to the middle, goes out the top, there is no 3-dimensional location. An entire massive aspect of human memory just gets dumped. So this is why, if you can, I tell my freshmen, anytime I have freshman seminar, you invest in one thing, printer. Go plant a tree, because you're going to be printing everything out. And by changing nothing else about your life, simply by reading hard copy versus digital, you will learn more, comprehend better. Writing, you handwrite versus type, you will learn more and remember more. Now, if you're talking about writing like an essay, cool, probably type it up, but I'm talking about notes. If we're in learning mode and the purpose of writing is to learn, do it by hand, not by keyboard. Manipulatives, you get to move on the screen. This is just across the board. So anytime, rather than thinking, how do we use tech best? The proper question is to say, where can I strip tech out? And when is it essential? Only when it's essential do I now start to ask, how do I use it best? Other than that, there is no best. That's like saying, what's the best way to ingest arsenic? Well, you could probably find a best way, but none of it's good. There is the proper answer would be, don't even question. It's silly. Same thing here with tech, believe it or not. Now, before we move into the question then of AI and how that kind of plays into this whole game, I'd be remiss if I didn't show you a couple of more principles of learning. If you're stuck using tech, if for some reason we have to use tech, there are 2 considerations to kind of keep in mind. One is that multitasking thing. If you can lock a system, great. If you can make it so people can't multitask, awesome. Very hard to do. I don't know how to lock someone's computer in that way. So I wanted to give you a couple of other principles to think about when you're thinking about designing, teaching digital. One concerns deep memory. So y'all know kind of the cornerstone of learning is memory. right? We know you've learned something because you at some level studied that information. So what is the key then to making a deep, durable, lasting memory? What does a moment, an event, a fact have to have if you want to form a deep memory? If you're anything like us, right now, the first thing going through your head is emotions, right? If something is emotional, it'll memory. But if something is just kind of neutral, boop, you'll make a little baby memory. Now, that's kind of true. There's definitely some truth to this, but it can't be the big C. Otherwise, tell me, why would we know this so dang well? I don't think anyone in the world is emotionally invested in the McDonald's "I'm loving it" jingle. Like, we don't go home at the end of the day, pop that on our steering, and we go, "Ah, oh, yeah, there she is." So here are radio jingles, and I don't know anyone's from the UK, so I picked the most global one I could think of. But any radio jingle you know of from the UK, here are things nobody really cares about, yet we got really deep memories for it. So it turns out emotions really can't be the big secret. So, okay, if we assume everything is going to get into the brain about the same, our next theory was it must be, you got it, pure repetition, right? Just see it again, memory's going to get bigger. See it again, memory, just keep shoving that thing into your brain time and time again, your memory will get bigger, bigger, bigger. Now, that's kind of true. There's definitely some truth to that. It's not wrong, but it can't be the big secret. Otherwise, tell me, without cheating, which of those logos is accurate? So here is something you have repeated, just pure repetition ad nauseum. So without peeking, which is the right one? And now here, I'll put you out of your misery. Why is it almost no one recognizes it? Is none of those. Actually looks like that. Dollar coin, right? From memory, try and draw a pound and then compare it to an actual pound. You're not even going to be close. So here are things we have repeated ad nauseum, yet no one's got deep memories for. So pure repetition can't be the big secret. Turns out when it comes to making deep, durable, lasting memories, we've been looking in the wrong spot. We've been so focused on how information gets into the brain that we miss the big trick. You want a deep, durable, lasting memory, has a little bit to do with how it goes in, absolutely. But it has a lot more to do with how you take it out. Access a memory and that memory gets deeper. Access it again and the memory gets deeper. Memory is constructive. The more you access, pull out, utilize memories, the deeper, more durable, easier to access those memories become. We officially call this concept recall. The key to deep, durable, lasting memories is recall. The reason why we remember radio jingles isn't because we've heard them 1,000 times. It's because we've sung them 1,000 times. And every time you sing it, you're accessing that memory. It's getting deeper. The reason why we don't remember logos or coins isn't because we don't have a memory for it. It's because when was the last time you had to access it? It's in there. It's just really small until you start pulling that thing out. So think about it like this. How many of our students love this? Multiple choice questions. Why? Because they don't got to do anything. Have a read, see what resonates, off you go. Does this type of question do much to boost your memory? A little bit, to be fair, not a ton. You want to turn this into a memory boosting question. What do you got to do? And how many students hate this? The open-ended question. Why? Because they got to put in the work. But that work is the thing that activates the memory machinery, is the thing that makes that memory deeper. So now we can come back to the question of tech. If the key to deep, durable, lasting memories is recall, what is the one thing tech ensures you never have to do? Bingo. I always say, man, what is your best friend's phone number from the time you were a kid? 740-7897. Dano Swanson down the street. I haven't dialed that thing in 35 years. What is your best friend's phone number today? I don't know. Why? Because I know where it exists, but I don't know what it is itself. So one of the biggest problems with tech is recall is kind of the key to deep memories. Tech is a tool we use to offload recall. We will remember where to access that information, but that is very different than knowing the information itself. If you're really interested in doctors knowing how to read about something, congratulations, tech is your tool. If you're really interested in doctors knowing how to do things, what the actual things are, then this tool is not going to be well suited to that. So how do you build recall into tech? I don't know. But just if we keep this in mind, then that becomes kind of something. As we're designing tech, how do we strip away as much storage as possible and force them to be using recall even though they're in a digital world? I don't think there's one easy answer to do that. Some people are building more apps to like quiz people. But look, if you need to build an app to solve a problem that the tool itself created, why are you doing it? Stop the tool, you don't need the app. Hey, hooray, we just solved the problem without 6 steps of separation. But now thinking beyond tech as well, This is why things like preview priming become so important. You have a class, first 5 to 10 minutes of class, how are we just recalling, bringing information online that we've learned in the past? That's going to help us frame, not only deepen those memories, but now frame what we're about to learn here. End of class, could we do recall-based notes, quiz before we leave? What were the 6 big things we talked about? Could we start deepening memories within the very class that we learned them? And for our students, this is one of the big ones we've got to get to them. Most of our students, when they study, they're going to do what's called passive review. They're going to put information back in. I'm going to reread that chapter. I'm going to rewatch your lecture. I'll reread my notes. If all they're doing is putting information back in, is that doing a ton for their memory? A little bit, to be fair, not a huge amount. You want to be turning study time into useful time. What do you got to do? Active recall, quiz yourself, take a practice exam, do some worked examples from the book, try and write your notes from memory, then compare, debate somebody about a topic, anything to get you ripping memories out. That's where you're going to get your bang for your buck when you study. So this is one that we want to get to our students as well. Now, one final principle I wanted to hit before we move into AI then is written text and the spoken word do not mix. So who cares? What does this mean? To understand this one, I'm going to start with a quick game. I'm going to play a sound clip. All you've got to do is listen to this sound clip and try your best to follow along. Hopefully it comes through. We'll see what happens.
Why? Let's do a little experience here. I'm going to read the description of a famous literary character. While in your right ear, I'm going to read the description of a different famous literary character. Your job is to try and pay attention to both simultaneously. Here we go. His limbs were in proportion, and his horseshoe mouth. A small yellow skin scarcely covered the work of muscles and arteries, while the right eye disappeared entirely. His hair was a lustrous black.
How you doing?
Teeth, a horny lip, pearly white, forked chin. In fact, these luxuriances, his whole body may have been described more twisted contrast with his watery
I'll tell you what,
that stiff red hair almost of the
I'll put you out of your misery. You probably realized you couldn't do that. Well, no crap, said anyone with 2 kids ever trying to yell at them at once. That was obvious. So why is that so difficult? Well, it turns out when we listen to somebody speak, the first part of our brain to activate is this big area here. Now, this is the part of your brain that processes sound. You got one of these behind each ear, so you can hear 2 voices at once. That's not a problem at all. But if you want to pay attention to what the voices are saying, 150 milliseconds later, the next part of your brain to activate is this little nugget here. And just to be simple, we're going to call this your language area. Problem, you only got one of these. So even though you got enough brain to hear 2 voices, if you want to pay attention, you now need to funnel both of those into one small spot, and there just ain't enough brain to handle it. We hit what's called a neurological bottleneck. You probably noticed you could listen to one voice, but then this one becomes noise. Or you could jump to this voice, but then this one becomes noise. But we can never do 2 at the same time. We simply don't have the brain for it. Now, who cares? I don't think any of us are going to teach class 2 at a time, right? Like, I'm going to teach you physics over here, she's going to teach you math over here, we're going to double your learning today. Like, who cares? No one does this. Here's where this comes good. I want to play one more game with you. On the next slide, I'm going to pop up the words to a poem. Well, at the same time, I'm going to play the audio of me reading a different poem into your speakers. Your job is going to be to read and understand the poem on the screen while listening to and understanding the poem in your ears at the same time. Let's see what happens. Here we go. His pursed lips would seep angelic smoke, and I would inhale it like it was second-hand death. Both of us speak like poetry books and scar each other's tongues with limerick, with charcoal, with significance. Okay, and how'd you do? Now, if you're like most people, you didn't do near as well as you thought you were going to do. But for anyone who thought, no, I did pretty good, tell me, what were either of those 2 poems about? Like, you probably got a word. Like, some people say splashing or smoking, like, but you don't really know what any of those or either of those are about. So wait a second, why was that so difficult? It turns out first part of our brain to activate is this big area back here. Now, this is the bit of the brain that processes vision. So it makes sense. You're looking at something, you're seeing something cool. But if what you're looking at is text, watch what activates in your brain 150 milliseconds later. Look familiar? Question, why would the part of the brain that processes sound activate when you're reading? Because what do you hear when you silently read? You hear your own voice. And so far as your brain is concerned, your internal reading voice is processed the same way as an out loud speaking voice. When you're reading to yourself, so far as your brain knows, what you're really doing is saying words out loud, listening to them as they come back into your ear. And once we get this activation in the language area. So just like you can't pay attention to 2 people speaking at the same time, neither can you read while listening to somebody speak at the same time. We don't have the brain for it. And in fact, interesting aside, you don't only hear yourself. we are incredibly adept at mimicking other voices as well. So if you know Morgan Freeman, as you read that, if I could have imaged your brain, it would look as though he were whispering in your ear right now, which is an absolute dream come true. Go. So, all right, the principle is written text and spoken word do not mix. You cannot read while listening to somebody speak at the same time. Now, I'm sure you're already coming up with some ideas about what this might mean for us, especially when it comes to learning digitally. But I do want to point out one massive caveat here. This might not matter as much for us in one sense, but it might, who knows? The caveat is this. In order for speech and text to clash, you have to be fluent in each. So if you are new to one or the other, or you're struggling with one or the other, then bringing the two together is still one of the strongest things you can do. It's only once you hit fluency that we got to pull them apart. So think about it like this. I've got a daughter, I'm teaching her how to read right now. Best way to teach her how to read, point to a word, say a word. Point to a word, say a word. It's only once she starts to develop fluency in reading that I'm going to have to start to pull the two apart because they're going to start to clash. Or flip it. If you're learning a second language, I'm learning Italian right now. I can read Italian just fine. I can't hear it to save my life. In which case, the best way for me to hear it is to read along while someone's talking. That's the only way I can start to parse it. Now, eventually, I'm going to get good at hearing it, then I got to pull the two apart. But just know if you're not fluent in one or the other, or one is degraded, like if you're a professor with a really thick accent that your kids aren't getting, then bring the two together. Or if you've got an audio clip that's really jarbled from the 50s, man, bring in some text to help people parse it out. But if you're good at each, do not bring them together. So bring this back now. I'm thinking digital. Most digital teaching is done by slides and handouts and screens, which are still text heavy. You try and teach over something like this, your kid's got to choose. Do I listen or do I read? Because we intuitively know we can't do both. Guess what 95% of students are going to do? Listen or read. They're going to read. They're going to assume if it's important, you put it on the screen, ergo, you've just made yourself obsolete. I'll just read this, which is fine. If your students are ignoring you and reading what you put on the screen, that's totally fine. The problem is most human beings read much faster than other people speak. So there is every chance they're going to be done reading long before you're done talking about it. And that's when things get bad, because now your students are going to do this. A little bit of listening, a little bit of reading, a little bit of listening, a little bit of reading. Here's a word. Did they say this word yet? Here, oh, where are we? How far are we on this page? Once they start that jumping, what are they doing? Now they're multitasking, and what happens? Now learning goes down. We do this kind of research a lot. I teach a group of students, orally. They'll learn about this much. Next group reads the same material. They'll learn about the same amount. Third group reads while I teach over it. 30 to 70% drop in memory comprehension and retention, all because I've now asked you to do the impossible. So design issues, if we're going to have to use tech, how are we using it in a way that's not forcing our students to do the impossible? Someone brought this up the other day, and I think this is good. This is actually brought up at the beginning of today. Well, what about if the words you're reading are exactly the same as the words I'm saying? Do we have a problem then? Hopefully you caught on, yeah, it's the speed issue. Just go home tonight, pop on Netflix, put on your favorite show with subtitles. You'll notice you're done reading those long before they're done talking about them. And you're going to start jumping. You're going to start ignoring or wishing you hadn't read ahead, and it starts to become jarbled. So long as you're fluent, believe it or not, captions harm learning. Now go back to that though. If you're not fluent, if you've got a hearing problem, if someone on the video is degraded or has an accent you can't follow, of course bring captions in. But if all things being equal, if you're doing fine on both, captions actually harm learning. So I like that earlier when Lisa said, turn on captions if you need them, not we're going to burn captions in for everyone, whether you want them or not. That becomes kind of an issue. And you want to know the scariest thing about this one, by the way, is you do research, right? Give me 100 kids. We'll have them learn something online without captions, learn something with captions. You will show them you did better without captions and captions. Hand them their own data. To a man, guess what they will all still do? Put captions on. They'll still think they learn better with it. I know that was just a one-off. It feels real good to have words when you're listening, even though we can show you that it's harming you. So that's one of those really tricky ones where we've got to kind of drive that for our students, because most of them, even with that knowledge, will still go back to doing what's worse. So that's kind of Now, what about this? We were talking about this earlier, writing. So you can't read while listening to somebody speak at the same time. Can you write while listening to somebody speak at the same time? Uh-oh. All you got to do, go home tonight, start writing something. Well, you're already home. Shoot, just start writing something after this call. Pull your attention back. What do you hear when you write? most of us will hear our own voice. Most people dictate to themselves when they write. And if you hear your own voice, we're going to get that same bottleneck in the language area. So just like you can't read and listen, neither can most people write while listening to somebody speak at the same time. We don't have the brain for it. But here's a caveat. If your students are taking notes while you're teaching, they're necessarily going to be missing some information. But we also know that anytime somebody writes something down, they tend to remember that stuff better than things they don't write down. So on one hand, if they're noting while you're teaching, they're missing. But on the other hand, whatever they're noting down, they're probably going to get a little bit better. So how do we handle this? How do we marry these two together? And hopefully you realize this is kind of the fun of pedagogy. There's no answer to this. All we got to do is if we know the principles, we now get to adapt it for us, our purposes, our classrooms. I know some professors who don't care. They just say, look, take notes. I'm fine you missing stuff, whatever matters to you. Cool. Other professors I know are now starting to bake it in. We're going to teach for 10 minutes. We're going to note for 2. We're going to teach for 5. We're going to note for 1, whatever it is. You take a course with me at university. There are no notes in my room at all. There's no pen, no paper, no notebooks, no nothing. Everything is in the hall. For an hour, it's just me and you. We're talking. In the last 10 to 15 minutes of class, now we're going to take a group notes. I'm going to, connection unstable. Sorry, you probably lost me there. But what I said is in the last 10 to 15 minutes of my classes, that's when we're going to take a group notes. So I'll say a word, you all tell me what you remember from them. I'll be the one scribing it down. We all get it later. So that's how I've chosen to do notes. No notes during class, only notes after class. That also allows us to do some recall, which deepens the memories as well. But that's just me. That's just one man. So there is no answer how to do this. But just know if we keep that kind of stuff in mind, we can have a better think about how we want to organize digital, live, or any other form of learning. And by the way, I will point this out too. However you choose to do notes, pen and paper, that's how you get that memory boost. Remember when I said when you write something down, you remember it better? That really only happens with this. If you type something down, you don't always remember it better. And in fact, some people don't remember it at all if they type stuff down. So just know, however you choose to do notes, pen and paper is still the only way to at least tap into that memory boost that we want. And last but not least, before we move on, I would be remiss if I didn't bring this up because I know this is a big kind of thing going around. Listening to music while we study. What do you think? Doable? Good? Bad? Indifferent? Believe it or not, there is the trick to remember when it comes to music and study is it's totally personal. The amount of, like, if I could take a poll, I can't see anyone unfortunately, but like if I said raise your hand if you need noise when you study, about half of you will. If I say raise your hand if you need silence when you're learning, about half of you will. So this is not a group-wide thing. This is a person-by-person thing. But for those students, those individuals who say, I need noise when I study, what we think is going on is a process called stochastic resonance. Now, scary sounding term, totally simple. All stochastic resonance says is if you inject noise, pure random noise into a system, that noise can glom onto units within that system and upregulate them, make them work better. So in this case, on your screen, here's an example. You got a little sine wave. Now I'm going to inject some noise through this sine wave. And watch, the noise isn't going to cut right through the middle of the sine wave. The noise is going to glom onto or start to resonate with that sine wave. The peaks become higher, the valleys become lower. Noise makes the signal sharper. Now, just because this is so important, let's see another example. So here's an image. I'm guessing you all can basically see my image. It's Lady Liberty. She's just blown out. Let's add some noise to this. So in this case, I mean visual noise. Remember old TVs, you get between the stations, you get that static? Let's take a snapshot of that visual noise, put it on top of this picture, watch what happens. Oh, hey, all of a sudden the darks are darker, the contrast enhances. Noise makes the signal sharper. Well, cool, if adding one layer of noise makes this thing sharp, then surely adding 3 layers of noise is going to make this thing high definition. Let's see what happens. Oh, right. Now there's too much noise and we're blown out in the other direction. So stochastic resonance, you add a sweet spot amount of noise to a system, it can upregulate units within that system. That's what we think is happening here. When we listen to music, our brain can convert that music into noise, assign it to our attention network, and upregulate our attention. All of a sudden, we can sustain focus longer. We can block out distractions easier. Noise makes the signal sharper. But 2 important rules if you're going to let your students do this. One we already saw, highly personal. The amount of noise you need, way too much for somebody else, not near enough as somebody else. So this isn't a group, this is a person thing. And realistically, it's context by context. The amount of noise I need when driving a car, totally different than the amount I need when balancing my checkbook, which, yes, I still do that. Probably the last person in the world. So you've also got to kind of play this context by context. But the second caveat, and this one's probably the most important, is this. Stochastic resonance will only happen if the music you're listening to is highly predictable to you. It has to be so predictable that your brain can just turn it into noise, off you go. So this means it doesn't matter if it has lead. I have a metallic CD. It's got words, it's loud, it's obnoxious, but I've heard it. My brain's converting it into noise, I'm off doing something else. But if you have a kid who's like flipping through songs and they got their iPad on shuffle and they're like, ooh, that's a good one. Oh, thumbs up. Or they're like dancing and singing along. Man, that ain't noise. Now it's a signal. It's drawing their attention, and now they're multitasking. Things start to go down. So it's a real knife's edge. You'll know stochastic resonance is happening when you don't hear the music. That's the entire point. Like, you put on your favorite CD, you're like, I can't wait for track 3. You get to work, next thing you know, it's track 8. You go, oh, I missed my song. Yeah, because you were doing stochastic resonance. But again, man, if you're dancing around jamming multitasking, that's kind of harming you. So I just wanted to bring in those two we've got 3 big principles today: the multitasking principle, the written text spoken word principle, and the recall principle. I just think those are things you might want to think about if we're using tech when it comes to design, and even off-tech design issues as well. This will now bring us into our final topic of the evening. AI. Now, I don't know if you guys have heard of this before. Artificial intelligence, kind of new, kind of coming out. I'll tell you 2 things. Anytime I talk about AI, here's what I think. AI, the tool nobody asked for, solving problems nobody had. What the heck does this thing even exist for? Has anyone stopped to ask why there was a time when people had to convince you to buy their tools because it would solve a problem. Your shirt is stained, this will get that stain out. You got a sore knee, this will help that pain. AI didn't do anything. They just shoved this into the world and said, you tell us what this is good for. Why? I don't know, and I don't care. Nobody needs this. What was this tool invented for? And I will also say this. We're not even close to what we meaningfully mean AI. I unfortunately know a lot of people who work in this field, and I even less fortunately have had to deal with a lot of the big names in this field. A, they're idiots. But B, if you get behind the curtain, so Sam Altman, the dude from OpenAI, flat out, the guy's an idiot. I'm not going to hide that. The dude is a venture capitalist. He doesn't know the first thing about coding or computers. This is all just noise to him. The one thing he did good in his life was he rebranded machine learning as artificial intelligence. If you talk to anyone who's actually working in the field, they'll tell you, we've been doing this since the 80s. There is nothing new. The only thing we have is more power and more data, but the algorithms have not changed for 40 years. This guy rebranded machine learning as AI. Smartest move he ever made. Made billions off the back of that, but by no means would we consider this what we meant when we were talking about AI in research fields before now. But just know, cool, just stop. Anytime someone says AI, just stop and say, cool, why does this tool exist? And the other thing you'll hear is we got to implement this. We got to integrate AI into school. Why? I'm fine with integrating a tool into school if you can explain to me why. But the only answer you'll ever get is because it exists. Mate, a lot of things exist. Guns exist. I'm not integrating those into school. Why do I need to do this? Because it's an information system. It's the only thing you'll ever hear that exists. Well, irrelevant. I align my tools to the outcome I need more. And just in case you're wondering, there is very little research on AI. So there are 2 things. And you guys know this. Most research fields are what are going to be called practically driven. There are other research fields that I call promissory driven. If you go through the research, there is no actual research. It's just people telling you what could happen someday, what might happen. We're having a thought experiment. The AI research field is all promissory. It's like 95% people telling you what's gonna happen someday in the future. If you actually look at the small amount of people who are doing real research, these things suck, man. They're worse than us at text summarization, assessment and feed, lesson generation, pedagogical suggestions, creative, where someone's actually done research. It way underperforms any other human being. In fact, there was someone just put out a study essay where they had 20 lesson plans for university sector. And 6 of those lesson plans were done by AI. The other 14 were done by humans. And then they just had a bunch of professors and teachers rate them all. What's good? Would you do this? Would you not? 6 of the worst 7 were the AI ones. They were so bad. It's like without even knowing it, we were already saying, man, this sucks. But we keep being told we need to use it. Why? So when we think about AI, there are three strands we kind of need to consider. The first is AI for learning, and this is kind of the big dog. And there are three kind of issues here. One is this: people saying our students can use AI as a tutor. Sal Khan, another wonderful idiot. I'm sure that guy has the best intentions in mind, but the 2 times I've met him, he doesn't know anything about teaching or learning. He's just a guy doing stuff, which is awesome, man. Keep it up. But do not make billions of dollars and tell the rest of the world how they need to do their job. That makes no sense to me. So Sal Khan comes along and say AI is going to be a personal tutor. Why? Because personal tutoring is so dang important. Is it? Is that really the gold standard of learning and education, Mr. Khan? Real quick, go back, 1960s, Eliza, the first AI chatbot for therapy comes out. This was supposed to replace therapists. All you do is tap in a question, it asks you some questions, you tap back, man, I don't need to pay someone, this is gonna do it. We've since had 60 years to improve AI when it comes to therapy, yet corporeal therapists thrive. And in fact, today, human therapists are 3 times better and 5 times better at treating depression and anxiety than even the finest digital therapists we've ever created. Why? Why has digital never really made an impact? Because the operative word in therapeutic relationship is relationship. It is exactly the same when it comes to learning. One-on-one tutoring. There was a time when Benjamin Bloom came out and said, hey, you have 2 sigma, 2 standard deviations better if you can have one-on-one tutoring versus learning in class. That sounded really good in the 80s. A lot more research has been done since then. Really, the impact of one-on-one tutoring is about 0.24 of a standard deviation, which is decent until you realize that empathy and empathetic relationship between the teacher and the student has a 0.62 impact on learning, almost 2.5 times more, which means if you have the choice between a machine that can give you the best pedagogy at the exact moment you need it and a human being that you care about, you will learn more from that human being than that perfect machine. The operative word when it comes to teaching relationship is relationship. It's not pedagogy, it's not teaching. This is why AI chatbots failed and will not be tutors. And by the way, I was on stage with Sal Khan explaining this. He came out 2 weeks ago and disavowed his own thing. He's like, yeah, I was wrong about the AI chatbot. I could have told you that 2 years ago, man. If you know how learning and teaching works, you don't have to say all this nonsense. Now, what does make an empathetic relationship? I just want to, why wouldn't we be able, someone's like, well, I can build an empathetic relationship with my AI. No, you can't. It's literally impossible. Empathy is one of the few things we know of that is transpersonal. So the way other things love, interpersonal. You can love an AI, humor. You can feel even sympathy. You can feel sympathy for a computer. You will never have empathy for a computer. What happens is anytime 2 human beings start interacting in a positive way, their bodies will both release a chemical called oxytocin. When 2 people simultaneously release oxytocin and they're interacting, their brains will start to synchronize. In a very real sense, if I could mirror your brain and your partner's brain while you're synchronizing, they would look almost identical. In that moment, you do not learn from each other. You start to think like each other. That's that empathetic moment. I am literally in your shoes. This means in order to have empathy, you need another person with oxytocin and a brain. What does a computer not have? Oxytocin or a brain. The 2 key ingredients you need for empathy, you will never get on tech. So we will never build an empathetic relationship with a computer. It is biologically impossible. Again, we can love it, we can sympathize with it, but we'll never empathize with it. And that seems to be the driver. Go back here, by the way, too. That 0.24 effect size, the reason why it's so low is empathetic relationship. You will only get good impact on one-on-one tutoring if you have a good empathetic relationship with your tutor. Most kids don't, therefore this goes down. If you kind of did a moderator analysis and looked at one-on-one instruction with an empathetic relationship, that number jumps up to about 0.6, 0.7, 0.8, around that area there, which is huge. But this just shows again how important the relationship is over anything else. This, by the way, is why that lack of empathy is why 80% of people drop out of online courses. Anyone who learns online does significantly worse, and they're less happy with their education. Why? Without empathy, once you hit a struggle spot, you quit. It's that empathetic relationship that pushes you to that next level. Okay, next thing people say when it comes to AI is this. Well, cool. AI gives us access to a ton of information. So now we can skip that tedious process of learning stuff and we can jump right into the higher order thinking skills. So HOTS, those are called higher order thinking skills. So this is UCL, one of yours, Rose Larkin, and I can't believe she actually made this argument. I know her, she knows better than this as well. This is very strange that she would have made this argument, but she says, look, we do not need to waste time learning stuff anymore. We can now jump right into doing, to creativity, to critical thinking. Really? Our motto when it comes to any higher order thinking skills that you want is this: facts always precede skills. Facts always precede skills. Some people get mad at me when I say this. Man, I could prove this to you 7 days a week, twice on Sunday. Doesn't matter how much you don't want it to be true. This is just a fact of human cognition. Human cognition, higher order thinking skills, can only occur using information you have embedded in your long-term memory. Your higher order thinking skills cannot be employed on external sources of data outside of the most cursory, pointless ways. So let's see one of these things in action. Creativity. For all the hubbub about creativity, creativity is ridiculously simple. Here are all the facts, the things you've learned, and here is an unknown problem state. Creativity is nothing more nor less than arranging your facts, your understanding, to fit an unknown problem state to build a new structure of memory. That's all it is. I take what I know, I rearrange it to build something I didn't know. Off we go. Now I know this and I can go to bigger problems. Now, how does it work? Anytime you enter into a creative problem-solving mode, you start with what's called focused thought. This is where you consciously pull out memories that you think are relevant to that problem, and you do the work. What if I put this over here? Does this help? What if I move this over here? You do your thinking. Now, what happens? 2, 3, 4 hours later, you're exhausted, you're done. You go away. You go for a walk. Maybe you go cook dinner. You go to bed. You take a shower. When you're done thinking, all of those things you were just thinking about go back to your brain, but they go back tagged. And now you enter into what's called diffuse thinking mode. Now, completely subconsciously, without you having to do a thing, your brain, through a process of reconsolidation, is going to start playing. It's going to say, hey, this kind of fits here. Did you know this fits over here? You never really thought about putting these together. And every once in a while, your brain, completely separate from you, will hit on something that's like, this kind of was what you were talking about. And that's going to kick you into a moment of focus thought. You're like, oh, wait a second, I got an idea. And now you're going to go back doing this. Da, 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 da. So creativity is this swing between focused thinking, diffuse thinking, focused thinking, diffuse thinking. And in fact, we now believe about 95% of your work, creativity work, is going to occur in a diffuse mode. This is why when you go to bed, you wake up with an answer. When you take a shower, you have a breakthrough. When you stop thinking and you let your biology get to work, that's when most of our higher order thinking stuff is done. What's the problem of this? Your brain can only think about things inside of it. You can access a computer, sure, but your brain can't. So long-term memory is essential for any of the higher order thinking skills: critical thinking, creativity, effective communication or collaboration. Your brain, because of that diffuse mode, needs the information inside of it if you want to do anything with it. So using AI to avoid learning facts is the surest way to make sure that those higher order thinking skills will never happen. You cannot skip that first stage if you want to get to the second stage. And like I said, man, Rose Larkin knows this. I don't know why she ever said that, but there you go. Last but not least, when it comes to learning then, is people say, well, can't we use AI to develop these skills? So, okay, we're going to use AI to do facts and push into those higher. So rather than using AI to avoid facts, we're going to use it to build skills. The problem is this: digital dependence. We tried that. One of the few research projects looking at AI has tried that exact same thing, where we're going to embed metacognitive questioning into AI. And then we're going to take kids away from AI and see, did it transfer over? Nope, it absolutely did not. Kids were only able to use their skills when they still had access to the tool. As soon as they stopped having access to the tool, they were not able to exercise those skills that they showed us they had developed using the tool. So we hit what's called digital dependence. Without the tool, they couldn't do it anymore. So this is why I always kind of laugh, is where what this makes it sound like is, and I heard somebody say this, I thought it was so good. This is like me telling you, if you're a horse, you don't got to worry about the invention of cars, because cars can never do what a horse can do. So you're going to be fine. But what you do got to be aware of when it comes to digital dependence is horses driving cars. So long as those kids have access to the tool, they will be able to continue to do those skills that they can't do off of those tools. So it is a true dependence. They need it. They can still get creative. If you do the right pedagogy on the tool, they just will never be able to do it off that tool. Whereas people who learn it off the tool can bring it wherever the heck they want to, so far as we've been able to see. Not automatically. Transfer is a very tricky thing, but I just wanted to point that out. And last but not least is this concept of fact learning. Well, what if they just learn facts online? Cool. You can't vet. Basically, 30% of everything you learn from AI is going to be wrong. And the only reason I know that is because I know so much stuff. Students, by definition, don't know so much stuff. So if they're using this to learn facts, they don't know what's right and what's wrong. They can't accurately vet any of the information. They're going to be learning wrong stuff. This is literally why textbooks were invented and why they're making a comeback. This is information that's already been vetted by experts. You can trust all of it, and it's done in a way that's going to help you, as opposed to online where if you don't know enough, you don't know what's right, what's wrong, you're going to learn some wonky stuff. The next aspect of AI then is here. AI for learning, and I'm going to skip that. AI for pedagogy. That's AI for learning. I'm going to skip this because it just makes sense that if you use AI to develop pedagogical programs, courses, techniques, lessons, they're going to be worse than if you just do it yourself 100% of the time. If you use AI to avoid doing work, don't be surprised when it's not good work. And that's why most people use AI. We're not using it because we can't think of stuff. We're using it because we don't want to think of stuff. Well, cool. It will think of stuff for you, but that stuff is going to suck compared to what you would have done. Will have been faster. So this is where you get to battle efficiency versus output, whatever you want to do. Last but not least, I'm going to bring this up. And I'll warn you, this is the first time I've ever spoken about this publicly, so this might come off as very weird, but let's see if I can figure this out myself. I think we're all asking the wrong question. When it comes to AI, we're all trying to figure out what's the best way to use it. How should I be using this tool? What's it good for? What's it bad for? That's the wrong question. We've got to probe AI itself. So to understand what I'm thinking about, I want to start with a quick story from Socrates. So Socrates, he never wrote anything down. As you know, this dude hated writing. So we only know what he thought through his student Plato. Now, Plato tells of a story that Socrates told of Thamus and Thoth. So Thamus was the pharaoh of Upper Egypt. Thoth was the god of invention. So Thamus throws a big party and invites Thoth down and says, hey, show us all your new inventions and we're going to have a good old time. So Thoth comes in and they spent days doing it. He's like, here's math. Yay. Here's measurement. Oh, yeah, it's wonderful. Yay. And he's shown them all these things and everyone's happy. And right at the end, Thoth is like, I saved my best for last. Are you ready? Here's my hands down the greatest invention I ever invented. This tool will make Egyptians smarter. It will build wisdom. This changes the game. Are you ready? And Thamus is like, yeah, baby, give it to me. What is it? Thoth says, I present to you writing. Here is writing. This changes everything. Drops the mic, he's out. At which point Thamus chimes in and says, sir, out of love for your tool, you've assigned it the complete opposite of what it's actually going to do. And he made a good point. He said the inventor of a tool is not the right person to tell you how that tool is going to be used because they can't see it. You think this is going to make people smarter? No, what it's going to do is it's going to offload their information. They're not going to know more stuff. They're simply going to have access to more stuff. And in terms of wisdom, what it's going to do is it's going to give them the conceit of wisdom because they have access to so much stuff. They're going to feel or think they're wise, but they're not actually going to be wise in any way that we deem wise in the past. So out of thank you, mate, but no thank you, this is why Socrates never wrote anything down. This, we think, was his way of telling us, I don't like writing. Why? Notice he was talking about the tool itself. Socrates wasn't saying writing is good for math, but bad for science, good for this, bad for this. He was saying the tool itself is going to redefine our world and the way we understand it. It's going to change our definition of the word wisdom to mean something lesser than what it means now. And as soon as you adopt the tool, you've got to adopt that worldview, and he didn't want to do it. This is what Wittgenstein meant when he said language is not the vehicle of thought, it's the driver. Language, our most basic tool, it doesn't just reflect what we think, it dictates what we were allowed to think. Neil Postman, tools change what we think with, tools change what we think about, and tools change the context we think in. Marshall McLuhan, the medium is the message. Man shapes tool, thereafter tools shape man. So the question we've got to ask about AI isn't how do we best use this tool? It's what is the worldview of this tool? And when we allow that tool into our society, how does that redefine our definitions of the world? How does that highlight some things, eliminate others? How does that put some things on the foreground, some things into the background? Think about it like this. Here's just two examples I wanted to throw. The printing press. Who invents the printing press? Steve Gutenberg from Police Academy. No, it's the Johann, the other Gutenberg. Why does he do this? Because he wants to bring people into church. He realizes, look, I can print the Bible. I can get people to fall in love with God. Cool. The inventor of a tool, not the right person to tell you how that tool is going to be used. Real quickly, Martin Luther realized, no, you put a Bible on everyone's table. That doesn't bring them to church. That makes them their own church. And more importantly, that makes them their own pope. They no longer need someone to dictate or interpret what that means for them. They can form their own interpretation. So Gutenberg invented this tool to bring people into the church. It drove a wedge right through his church because he never stopped to ask, what is the world view? How does this change our definitions of the world? Here's a medical one I wanted to throw in, the DSM. Specifically the DSM-3. So you probably, if you work in psych at all, you know this. This is how we diagnose psychological disorders. So it's basically just a checklist of behaviors to say, if you present 6 of these 10, you have this diagnosis. If you present these 4, you have this diagnosis. Cool. Now this was invented to allow more consistency across clinics. So old versions would have a lot of psychotherapy involved, and maybe your parents did this. So the same person would get 10 different diagnoses depending on who they were working with. This came in and said, we can systematize diagnosis, just get a little bit more consistency so we know how to treat them. What's the worldview? Once you reduce all human suffering to a set of measurable and tick-offable behaviors, now you can treat those behaviors without ever having to know the person or the things that caused them. The DSM, which was supposed to help psychology, was the birth of all pharmaceutical industry. The only reason pharmaceuticals in the psychological field exist in the power they do now is because they can treat the behaviors that you tick. Take this pill, you won't tick that one anymore. You don't have that disorder anymore. They were there just to help people get better diagnoses. In truth, it stopped the human aspect of psychology, cut it off at the feet, and handed it to someone else. This is what happens when you don't ask, what is the worldview of the tool? Not how do we use it best, where do I use it? It's what is the tool itself. So what is the worldview of AI? When we allowed this tool into our society, how has this changed what we think, and is it already changing how we view and understand the world? Here's where things are going to get trippy. I don't think anyone knows the answer yet. So this is just a few of us thinking and pounding ideas around. To frame the worldview of AI as I see it, and do not take any of this as read, but it's something worth thinking about on your own. What do you think the worldview of AI is? To frame it, though, I just want to do this real fast, and we'll wrap up here in about 2 minutes. Neil Postman talks about 3 great stages of any culture, and we're the only ones, well, not the only ones now, that's reached the end. Stage number 1 is tool users. These are when people build tools to solve problems. Tools are used to support human endeavor. At some point during development, and we can talk about when this happened, it's very fun to kind of pick it out, you move into what's called a technocracy. This is when the tools become so important that you stop using the tool, adjusting the tool to suit the human, and you start moving humans to suit the tool. So this is like the assembly line, where all of a sudden the tools become the key driver and human becomes secondary to it. And now basically at this stage, efficiency becomes the key to everything. At this stage, you have morality separate from the world. What you're doing with your tools and how you're thinking about the world are 2 different things. At this stage, this is when the two start to bleed. The tool starts to build the worldview, and really the only big worldview here becomes efficiency. Tools are only useful in the fact that they can do more, better, faster than humans. You do that long enough, eventually you'll hit a technopoly. And this is where the tool now builds the morality for the culture. It's not simply that the tool is better than us, it's that the tool is smarter than us. And human beings are now wickedly fallible compared to the machine. The machine can now do no wrong, only human beings can do wrong. And you think that's silly. America got there, I think Japan has gotten there, I think the UK has gotten there. I think we're all kind of pushing into that, which is very scary. But you think that's silly. My favorite thing of all time is the biggest, tell anyone, I tried AI to do this. I asked AI to do this and it didn't. The response will always be, you did it wrong. And we're back to where we started. You're using the tool wrong. You've got to learn to use the tool better. The tool can never be wrong. The tool is only doing perfection. You're asking it the wrong questions. You're plugging in the wrong stuff. When the tool goes wrong in a technopoly, it is not the tool's fault, it is your fault. That is a hell of a shift of worldview. Now, assuming these three stages, now we can start to say, what's the biggest differentiator between those stages? And it seems to be information. This, to me, seems to be the biggest driver. So information in a tool using culture is there, and you have yours and it's organized. Once you get into a technocracy, information starts to explode. Now, everyone thinks information is just a one-edged sword. It's all good. Information cures everything. Information is a secret to whatever we need. No, information, like everything, is a double-edged sword. Some information good, too much information is a horrible thing. Do you think the reason why we have a war in Gaza right now is because we don't have enough information? Do you think why we have hunger is because we don't have enough information? Why we're about to get a 5 hurricane across Florida is because we lack information? No, the answers to most of our pressing problems are no longer informational based. It's now how are we using it? But in a technocracy, you just get more and more information. That is where we now need to think, how do we organize information to stop people from being overwhelmed, so they can start to build a worldview and actually live consistently within that worldview? In a tool using culture, church usually did that. Religion was usually the information organization. We're going to tell you what matters, what doesn't. Cool. In a technocracy, that's when we start getting public institutions, things like school, things like the law, things like family units, things like medicine. These industries, these social endeavors are basically there to help us organize information. Here's what's important, here's what's not. Here's how we think about this, do not worry about this. This is why, like in a university, you can study medicine, but you can't study astrology. It's not that astrology doesn't exist, it's that we've deemed that too much and unnecessary information. Let's keep focused so we can build a coherent worldview. In a technopoly, all of those structures collapse. And now people just have way too much access to information and they do not know how to organize it. So you're left with basically lost, flailing human beings. And that is exactly what we're seeing. This is why, man, Neil Postman calls it the pop-up generation, where the news is like this, and then this, and then this, and then this. And it all feels good and sounds good, but you don't remember any of it because none of it is connected in any coherent worldview. It doesn't tell any coherent story. And now once you lose story, you start to feel lonely and isolated, which we're seeing in a bunch of teenagers. It's the problem of having too much information. How are we going to now organize that information? That brings us back to AI. Religion has now basically gotten its butt kicked by too much information. School is getting its butt kicked. Law is barely hanging on there. Political organizations, which used to organize information, are now getting their butts kicked. The worldview of AI, so far as I can tell, is now saying this: human thought is best represented as language. All AI is going to be language-based and numerical-based. Cool. This is why we have prompt engineers. Hooray for the prompt engineers. Language can be statistically modeled and predicted. If human thought is best represented by language, and language can be statistically modeled and predicted, then this means, by default, human thought can be statistically modeled and predicted. Now we get to have some fun. If we assume there is a statistical way to understand language, and this means there will always be a statistically best answer to any question asked. But if you ever want to get that answer, you need information. And objective AI is better at finding those answers amid all the noise than subjective humans. And we're back. In a technopoly, once you go from technocracy to a technopoly, information becomes everything. And the answer to the problem of having too much information is you need more information. And now we need someone to organize it. So the worldview, so far as I can tell, of AI is that information is king. All problems in the world need more information. It's the only way we're going to solve them. And only AI has enough information to organize it and rule it all. No one else can tap it all except for this right now. So I think once we allowed AI into our culture, we started to think information is key. And I think that's always been going on. I think it's just now crossed the threshold where everyone is saying everyone needs more access to information. You're sad, get more access to information. But the only way to organize it is through the tool that I have created. Therefore, rather than church, rather than a political party, rather than a school, we're going to let the tool itself not only generate the information, but dictate to you how to organize it and think best about it. And it will do it better than anything you could ever possibly do. That scares the shit out of me. But this is what I mean. Ask the question, not how do we use it. Ask the question, what is the worldview of the tool? Once you accept the tool, you have to accept that worldview. And I'm trying to guess where we're going if we allow this thing unfettered run like it's got now. So we're back here. I'm still a Luddite. We've seen tech harms learning at every level. It has for 40 years. It ain't going to work. Some countries like Sweden and Finland are starting to give it up because it ain't working. Other countries will follow suit. AI, because it's a form of tech, is not going to do any better for learning. It's not a learning tool. And in fact, the worldview of AI might change our definition of what we mean by learning and information and meaning, which might be scary. Anytime I start talking about this, people say, yeah, well, people were mad at the wheel and people were mad at the automobile. People are always mad. You're just being angry in the face of progress. Notice when people make those arguments, they never bring up the atom bomb or Agent Orange or styrofoam. They only bring up the ones that they like. Fair enough. But yeah, I am going to be angry at it still. Thomas Sowell said, there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. Now you can ask, when you adopt a tool, what are you trading off? There's no answer to any of this. There's only trade-offs. When you accept AI as a learning tool, the things you are trading off is learning, your own professionalism as an educator, and deep thought in the people using it. If those are the purpose of an education, then why the heck would we trade the very thing we're trying to engender just to suit a tool? Never made any sense to me. So, all right, that is all I've got for you guys today. Huge day. We've seen a lot of different principles throughout as well, things hopefully we can use and think about in our own thinking, our own teaching as well. And I love, like I said, leave with that question of what is the worldview of AI? I don't think I have the right answer, the set answer. That's just where I'm at now, but I would love to just something to ponder as you go forward. When we use the tool, how does that dictate how we see the world and how we understand it? So, all right, the floor is open. I'm open for question. Over to you guys. Thank you guys for hanging out. If you got to disappear, I'll see you all later.
So I'll open up to either questions in the chat, or if people feel more comfortable to use their microphone, if they post in the chat, and just let us know and we can bring you to the microphone, as it were. We hope that obviously some of the sort of perspectives and approaches that Jared sort of presented in relation to the use of digital tools are deliberately provocative. I think when Jared opened his session, you've got a particular personal stance on where you see the role of technology in supporting learning that may not sit comfortably with everybody, and that's absolutely fine. This is a forum to bring in that challenge, that debate, and I think, Jared, you're very open to being challenged on sort of things that you've brought to the conversation. So if anyone wants to raise any sort of questions on the microphone, if you comment in the chat, or if you've got specific questions, please do pop them in the chat. We'll give you a few moments if you want to sort of gather thoughts, or if anyone wants to just unmute themselves and ask a question, then please do.
A lot of big ideas to toss around up there.
I
was jumping. We were saying too, Lisa, that if, because there's going on up here and we're going to put it out as a video as well, so more people watch this, I'm totally happy to answer questions at a later time. If you tomorrow, like you sleep on this tonight, and during that creative process you go, well, wait a second, that doesn't make sense, shoot me an email tomorrow, and if you're okay with it, I can share it with other people as well. If it's like a really good question that you're like, I think other people would have this, we can send the answer out to everyone as well. So just know, no pressure now. If things pop up over the next couple of days, send it our way. I'll keep going with y'all.
And we'll share your email address if that's okay for people to get in contact.
Yeah, no worries.
Paul Tiffin, I don't know if you've put your camera on with a view to asking a question, and Tim, you've also got your hand up.
Yeah, I was going to ask. I mean, but somebody else was quicker on the draw with the old virtual hand. I think Tim had his hand up first, so you go first, Tim.
Thanks, Paul. That's fine. You go ahead.
Oh, okay. That's right. It was just a quick comment. I mean, I do use AI a lot. I've done even methodology work on machine learning. Well, I don't. Yeah, like you, I'm a bit skeptical about the term AI rather than machine learning. And I agree with you. Sometimes it feels a bit like a hammer looking for a nail. What the point I was going to make was about when, in terms of student learning, and particularly we teach data science.
Yep.
In our medical school, we've got a master's program, and there's clearly a lot of reliance on some of these, AI tool, well, so-called AI tools. Let's call them chatbots, because let's face it, that's what they are. For not just for coding, but for generating essays and stuff. And it feels a bit like the moment, a bit like in the 80s, where people were trying to stop children, and I'm old enough to remember this, children using pocket calculators to do
Yeah.
maths. And I don't know to what extent you think that's a good analogy, because it's kind of out there. People are using them to produce essays, and this is obviously turning the world of assessment on its head, because we can't really use assignments in that sense anymore.
Yeah.
So to what extent do you think this is an analogy with the pocket calculator? What do we do? Do we just roll with it and just accept young people have pocket calculators now? Or do we fight against it and say, no, you're not allowed this in the classroom, you're allowed to use this in assessment? I mean, what's your views on that kind of side of things?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting, there's a big difference between calculators and AI, and the biggest, easiest way to see it is it's a closed system versus an open system. So the calculator is a closed thing. It can only do that which was programmed into it when you got it. AI will always, it's an open system. It's always going to be changing. So there will never be a moment where you've mastered this thing, because there will be nothing to master. It will it's a shifting goalpost. So I think when people say it's just like calculators, it's the Luddite argument. You didn't like calculators. Slightly different tools in the way they're built. But with that said, it's demonstrable that the use of calculators has harmed understanding of learning. It's not like, that's not even an issue anymore. And that's okay. So long, it's that digital dependence. So long as you have access to a calculator and you can get done what you need to get done, that's typically enough for most people. That's awesome. If you want to deeply understand maths, one of the things they'll do is they're going to teach you to do maths first, and then they're going to bring the calculator in only once you've achieved basic mastery. Now it's an offloading tool versus a learning tool. And I think what you end up getting there is a means end problem. We look at what experts do, and that's the end game of learning. I want you to be able to do what I do. But doing what I do, learning how to get here is very different than doing what I do. There's a path you have to take I can't start you here. So this is where we see learning and performance are very different things. If you use a calculator for learning, you never reach a stage of mastery on those topics. If you use a calculator after learning as offloading, cool, you will master the topics. Now you will simply lose the procedures, which is fine. So think of stats, right? I do stats. I knew how to do stats. I know what stats mean. I've used SPSS so much now, I couldn't tell you a single stats equation anymore. It's gone. So I get enough to use it and vet it. Now when it sends out something like, that's wrong, that's not the right answer, because I know enough to vet it. They just don't. So it's the same thing. As calculators killed understanding, AI, if you're already an expert, we can use it because we can vet it just fine. It will kill understanding of what it means to write a reasonable essay. If you become not a composer of writing, but just a reader of writing or an editor of writing, it's a very different skill set. You'll learn something, but you won't ever learn how to write. So if you're cool with that, sweet. If you never want to write something for the rest of your life, doesn't faze me in the least. But if you want human beings to learn the art of essay writing, and we think it's important to write ideas out, then that thing is it's just like a calculator, it will get in the way of deeper understanding, unfortunately.
Good. It's a useful way of thinking about it. Thanks, Jared. I'll let Tim.
No, thank you.
Question now.
Love it.
Thanks, Jared. Really good, helpful presentation. Lots of thought there. Thank you. Appreciate you taking time to try and condense some massive things, which we'll all go away and think about, no doubt. I was going to ask one question, but it's sort of tied into a question in the chat. Can you see the chat, Jared? I don't know if you can at all.
Oh, yeah. I didn't even look at it, to be honest. Yeah.
No, it's fine. There's Lisa. I don't want to jump into your role, but there was a question here that Andrew Wilson had. What are the implications for training faculty to teach in the digital hybrid era? Seems like we switched from static slides to PowerPoints without much thought. Instructional materials design feels like it needs a rethink in the light of neuroscience, learning, cognition. Just wonder what your thoughts, just thinking about, okay, what are we as the educators in health professions? What's the sort of one thing that we would might need to change? Is there a rethink that we need to do in our education practice?
Yeah. Yes. Oh, shoot. In the sense that should be the last port of call tech should be the last port of call when it comes to learning how to be a teacher. I mean, if you understand pedagogy, then you can make better decisions about how you will or will not use a digital tool. But if you don't understand pedagogy, you have nothing to base your decisions off of. So now it's just, I will tell you to do this with a tool and they'll do it, or they won't. Or we say, don't use this tool and they won't. So I think the tool stuff comes after the process stuff. And the process stuff is pedagogy. How do you teach? How does learning work? What do human beings need to learn best? Wow. And once you understand those stuff, then we can start thinking about pedagogical moves with relation to tech. So that's why I would say, if we're thinking about it, the tool, any tool, I would just put at the butt end of everything. Focus more on the learning and teaching stuff. And then if we do bring in the tool stuff at the end, it's just to say, make decisions aligned with what we know is working as much as you can.
Great there, thank you.
Lovely, thank you. I think we're coming up to just a couple of minutes before we're due to close. There is one more question on the chat that we've got another minute or so.
Was it Mark? Was it that one?
It is Mark, yes, yeah.
Yeah, I see that. That's a good one. So the question, if you can't see the chat, is computers are a barrier to learning because they're used for other purposes. What if there's a hardware, software that they're not familiar with? Will they be fine with it? Yes and no. The trick is if the tech you're using is not connected to the internet, it's a locked system, yes, then it can be an absolute awesome learning tool. Once a tool gets access to the internet, then it becomes a generalized tool that they will know how to kind of play with and hack, and then it doesn't. So I should have said the last thing you can kind of get away with is, yes, a locked system. If I have no other way to use this tool but this, then that will be the one way I use that tool. That's why like a little baby can have like a see and say, where it just has the letters. There's no internet connection. The only thing you do is press a letter, hear a letter. Cool, that's a good use of tech, I suppose. I'd rather her still use blocks because it's manipulative and you're going to learn more that way, but who am I? Don't worry about it. But this is, so yeah, if you have a locked system, awesome. But if you have like a new software that's run on a computer that has internet access that they know how to use, that ain't going to work. They'll still multitask their butts off in the background.
Thank you very much. Just drawing parallels to very briefly, so the setting where we have students use sort of iPads and digital devices in a lot of the sort of teaching activities that we do in the early years of our undergraduate program, and we have real issues with that tool being a distraction and not used in the same ways that we hope it would be, because of the fact that they're unlocked and they can access internet, social media and so on, and brings in
40 minutes of every hour they will be off task. You're turning an hour-long class into a 20-minute class as soon as you bring the computer out.
And where we're perhaps seeing better, more effective uses of a lot of digital tools are we're using sort of simulation softwares that students sort of brought into a sort of a technical world or digital world, but there isn't anything else that they can do in that world other than do the things that we explicitly want them to engage in. So that sort of idea of locking it off from the sort of distractional aspect of digital.
So I think that might be a good caveat to all of this, is when I'm saying digital tech, technically this water filter is digital tech. We're talking internet connected devices. If you've got like a haptic feedback surgery machine that isn't connected to the internet outside of you can get a download for it as needed, sweet, then I think you're in a totally different game. That's not the digital tech that should be of worry at all.
We'll draw things to a close just because I'm just keeping an eye on the time. There's a couple more questions that have come into the chat that we'll take out and maybe send on to you, to Jared, if that's okay for you to have a look at, and maybe sort of send some comments back, and we'll share that with the delegates that have joined this evening. So just to say a huge thank you for offering your time this evening, and really sort of opening up I suppose a bit of a Pandora's box around really thinking about how are we using digital tools and technology, and being really cognizant of having the principles of how we understand learning at the forefront of our minds as to where the sort of tools of technology best fit, and being sort of obviously aware of the advantages and potential pitfalls of artificial intelligence when it comes into developing. Students are just beginning to build their own expertise in something. So
there is no expertise in AI. Expertise takes a minimum of 10 years to really get in anything. this tool hasn't even existed for 2, and people are like, oh, let me have a conference on how to use it. Nobody knows how to use it, mate. That's like me inventing something tomorrow and saying I'm an expert. You just invented it. No one's an expert yet.
Very true.
You just use it.
So we will take the questions out of the comments that we've not got to. We'll send those on to Jared. Jared, you said you were very happy if we shared your sort of contact emails if people wanted to reach out and sort of extend the conversation around some of these things.
Yeah.
But we really hope that the sort of the session this evening has deliberately sort of provoked some sort of critical thinking on what we're doing with TEL and other sort of digital tools as they become a lot more widespread in what we're doing. Tim, any sort of final comments from yourself before we bring things to a close?
No, thanks very much for attending and joining in, and thank you again to Jared. That's a really helpful talk. Thanks very much. We will, in ASME, we will obviously be continuing to think around these thoughts, and thanks to the ASME events team as well, Gillian and co, in making it happen.
And real quick, I saw a comment from Nicholas says this is a bit disrespectful of Sam Altman. I know the guy. He's an idiot. He would call me an idiot. I got no problem disrespecting him. He's got no problem disrespecting me. Sorry, I'm not just saying that as some guy. We know each other. He's not a smart dude. And he would say the same exact thing to me. So there you go. It's just 2 people talking. You work in academia. You know how this goes.
Cool. Lovely. Thank you again, Jared. Thank you.
Thanks, y'all. Have a good night. Bye, y'all.